In late June of 1869, a man named John Roebling stood near the East River and looked across the water between Manhattan and Brooklyn. The river was crowded with ferries, ships, workers, wagons, and everything that both growing cities needed to survive. Roebling was not looking at the river like a passenger. He was looking at it like a problem. Every day, people crossed that water because they had no other choice. On clear days, the ferry was slow. In fog, it became dangerous. In winter, ice could stop everything. The East River controlled the cities, and Roebling believed it should not control them anymore. He wanted to build a bridge across that water. A bridge high enough for ships to pass beneath it, strong enough to carry wagons, streetcars, and crowds, and bold enough to join Manhattan and Brooklyn above the river. Roebling was an engineer who had spent his life studying cables, towers, weight, and force. He had built suspension bridges before, but the East River was different. This bridge would not only rise above the water, its foundations would have to go beneath it. That was the part the public could not see. Before anyone could walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, men had to work under the river in sealed chambers where water was held back by compressed air. They would not be building in sunlight. They would be digging in pressure, mud, heat, smoke, and darkness, and many of them would come out changed forever. The bridge was meant to connect to cities, but its first death came before construction truly began. While Roebling was surveying near the future bridge site, a boat struck the dock and crushed his foot. The injury looked survivable at first. Then infection entered the wound. Then tetanus came. The man who had imagined the bridge never lived to build it. John Roebling died in 1869. The project passed to his son Washington Roebling. Washington was 32 years old. He had served in the Civil War. He had studied engineering under his father. He understood the bridge better than almost anyone alive. But understanding the bridge was not the same as surviving it. He inherited a plan that looked beautiful on paper and brutal in reality. 2 giant stone towers had to stand in the river, one on the Brooklyn side, one on the Manhattan side. Each tower had to carry the weight of stone, steel, cables, roadway, traffic, wind, and time. The towers needed foundations strong enough to hold all of that, and those foundations had to be built below the East River. The solution was called caisson. A caisson was a massive wooden chamber. It was built like a huge box with no floor. It was floated into position, sunk into the riverbed, and filled with compressed air so water could not rush inside. Then workers entered through airlocks and began digging out the mud, sand, stones, and clay beneath it. As they dug, the caisson sank lower. Foot by foot, shift by shift, the tower foundation descended into the earth under the river. From the outside, it sounded like engineering. Inside, it felt like punishment. The men who worked there were called sandhogs. Many were immigrants, Irish men, German men. Men who had come to America looking for work and found themselves under a river, digging in a place where the air itself could hurt them. They were paid more than ordinary laborers because everyone knew the job was dangerous. But better pay did not make the caisson safe. It only explained why desperate men accepted the risk. The men who took this work were not thinking about becoming part of a legend. They were thinking about rent, food, and the next week's wages. Many lived in crowded neighborhoods where one lost job could pull a whole family down. The chamber paid more than ordinary labor, but that did not make it a gift. It was danger priced into a paycheck. A man could know the work was hurting him and still return the next morning. That is what poverty does. It turns risk into a choice that does not feel like a choice. Every shift began with the airlock. A worker stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Pressure built around his body. His ears hurt. His head felt tight. Then the second door opened, and he entered the chamber, beneath the river. There was no open sky down there. There was no fresh wind. There was only timber, lamps, wet earth, tools, and the sound of men digging while the East River pressed above them. The air was hot and strange. The deeper the chamber sank, the higher the pressure became. Men worked with picks and shovels. They loaded carts. They moved debris. They breathed air forced in by machines. The work was slow and heavy. Inside the chamber, progress was measured in small amounts. A few more carts filled, a little more mud removed. A few more inches gained. The men did not see a bridge rising around them. They saw timber walls, lamp, smoke, wet ground, and the same hard floor waiting to be dug again. Above the river, people could imagine the future. Below it, the workers saw only the next shovel load. The danger was not always immediate. Sometimes a man finished his shift, came back to the surface, and thought he had survived. Then the pain began. Some workers felt their joints burn. Some staggered as if their legs no longer belonged to them. Some collapsed after they had already left the chamber. Some were paralyzed. Some died. At the time, people called it chamber disease. Today, it is known as decompression sickness, or the bends. The men did not need the modern explanation to understand the fear. They saw strong workers go below the river and come back broken. They saw men walk in and get carried out. They saw pain arrive after the shift, as if the river had waited until daylight to collect its price. The sickness did not always look dramatic at first. Sometimes it looked like a man trying to hide pain because he needed the wage. Sometimes it looked like a worker sitting quietly after a shift, afraid to stand because his legs no longer trusted him. The bridge kept careful records of stone, cable, money, and measurements. Human damage was harder to count and easier to forget. The Brooklyn Chamber was the first great test. It sank slowly through the riverbed as crews dug beneath it. The men worked in heat and pressure, surrounded by timber walls and machine-driven air. Every basket of mud and stone meant the foundation dropped a little lower. Then fire broke out inside the chamber. A fire under a river sounds impossible, but the chamber was made of timber. Lamps burned inside it. Heat gathered inside it. Smoke began to spread where men were already breathing with difficulty. If the chamber failed, the tower foundation could fail. If the tower foundation failed, the bridge could die before it reached the sky. Workers fought the fire in that pressurized chamber beneath the river. They controlled it, repaired the damage, and went back to work. That is how monuments are often built. Something breaks. Men suffer. The problem is repaired, and the work continues. The Brooklyn Foundation was completed. But the Manhattan side demanded even more. The Manhattan chamber had to go deeper. And deeper meant greater pressure. The sickness grew worse there. Men were being sent into a world construction had entered before. Medicine fully knew how to protect them. Washington Roebling went down into the chambers himself. He inspected the work and studied the conditions. He did not want to lead the bridge only from drawings and offices. He wanted to see what the workers saw. But the pressure reached him too. He came out sick. At first, it may have seemed like something he could recover from. But the illness did not leave him easily. Pain, weakness, exhaustion, and nervous symptoms followed him. The chief engineer of the Brooklyn Bridge had been damaged by the same hidden force that was breaking the workers. He did not die, but he was never the same. The first engineer had died before construction truly began. The second engineer was now trapped by sickness before the bridge was complete. People began to wonder if Washington Roebling could still lead the project. Commissioners argued. Newspapers watched. Doubt moved around the bridge almost as strongly as the river moved beneath it. And then Emily Warren Roebling stepped into the story. Emily was Washington's wife. At first, many people treated her as a messenger, carrying instructions from a sick husband to the men at the bridge. But that is too small for what she did. Emily learned the bridge. She learned about cables, stress curves, materials, contracts, and construction decisions. She met engineers and officials. She carried Washington's instructions, but she also understood what those instructions meant. For years, she became the link between Washington's sick room and the construction site. Washington watched the bridge from a distance. Emily carried his voice into rooms where many men did not want to admit how much they needed her. The bridge rose because a sick engineer refused to let go, and because a woman carried a part of the weight history was not ready to give her credit for. But the bridge was not built by the Roeblings alone. It was built by men whose names did not become symbols. Sandhogs worked under the river, stonecutters shaped the towers, riggers climbed above the water, cable workers fought the wind. Laborers did the heavy work that held everything together. They lifted stone, pulled rope, carried tools, drilled holes, balanced on platforms, breathed the dust, and kept the bridge moving. Once the chambers reached solid ground, the towers began to rise. Stone by stone, the bridge climbed out of the river. Granite blocks were lifted into place by derricks. Workers stood on platforms high above the water. Ropes tightened. Pulleys turned. Loads swung through the air. A broken rope could kill a man. A falling stone could kill a man. A wrong step could send a worker into the river below. The danger had changed shape, but it had not disappeared. Below the river, the enemy had been pressure. On the towers, it was height, stone, wind, and weight. The men on the towers also lived under another kind of pressure. The work was visible now. Crowds could watch from the streets and from the river. Newspapers could describe the height and the daring. But being watched did not make a load lighter. It did not make a rope stronger. It did not make a tired man safer when he stepped onto a narrow platform above the water. The towers grew higher than the buildings around them. From the streets, people could look up and see the bridge becoming real. From the work platforms, men could look down and see the river that had already taken strength, health, and lives from the workers below. The official death toll for the Brooklyn Bridge is usually given as around 27, but a number is clean. It fits easily into a sentence. It does not show the men who survived but never recovered. It does not show a worker whose legs hurt for the rest of his life. It does not show the wife waiting for a man who came home unable to work. It does not show the men who were replaced because the bridge still needed bodies. When the towers were ready, the next great phase began. The cables had to be spun across the river. The Brooklyn Bridge would hang from steel wire. Thousands of wires had to be carried across the East River and bound together into enormous cables, strong enough to hold the road above the water. This work was not under the river. It was high over it. Men moved along narrow temporary footways. They handled wire in the wind. They checked tension. They watched alignment. They worked with the knowledge that one slip could send a body down toward the river or into the structure below. To the public, the bridge was becoming beautiful. To the workers, danger had simply moved from darkness to open air. Then came another problem. Some of the wire delivered for the bridge was defective. A project already paid for in sickness, injury, and death was touched by dishonest materials. The bridge survived because its design carried extra strength. But the scandal showed a truth that appears again and again in great public works. The public wants the monument. The companies want payment. The politicians want credit. The engineers want the design to stand. And the workers stand in the middle of all of it. The Brooklyn Bridge took more than a decade to build. During those years, the cities around it kept changing. Brooklyn grew. Manhattan grew. The river stayed crowded. Ferries still crossed. People still waited. Above them, the towers stood like a promise that had not yet been fulfilled. Slowly, the promise became real. The cables stretched across the East River. Suspender ropes dropped from them. The deck took shape. The bridge that had once existed only in drawings became something a person could stand on. On May 24, 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge opened. Crowds gathered. Flags flew. Ships filled the river. Politicians gave speeches. President Chester A. Arthur attended the ceremony. Emily Warren Roebling crossed first by carriage before the official opening. For New York and Brooklyn, it was a day of triumph. People stepped onto the bridge and saw the East River below them. They saw stone towers rising above them. They saw cables spreading across the sky. They saw two cities connected in a way ferries had never allowed. In many ways, they were right to celebrate. The Brooklyn Bridge changed New York. It made movement easier. It helped bind Brooklyn and Manhattan together. It became a symbol of ambition, engineering, and American confidence. By every public measure, it was a triumph, and it still is. Stand on the Brooklyn Bridge today, and it is almost impossible not to look up. The stone towers rise above the roadway. The cables fan across the sky. The East River moves below. Tourists take photographs. Cars and bicycles pass. The skyline surrounds the bridge from every side. It feels permanent. It feels like it has always belonged there. But it did not belong there. Men put it there. Men dug under the river so others could cross above it. Men entered pressurized chambers without understanding what the pressure would do to their bodies. Men came out bent in pain. Men lifted stone until towers rose from the water. Men spun cables across the sky. Men made a road where there had only been air. The official histories remember John Roebling. They remember Washington Roebling. They remember Emily Roebling. They remember the opening day, the speeches, the measurements, the longest span, the first great crossing of the East River, and the beauty of the finished bridge. They should remember those things, but they should not remember only those things. Because beneath the bridge was another story. A story of workers in compressed air. A story of immigrant men who traded their bodies for wages. A story of pain that did not always end when the shift ended. A story of a bridge that rose above the water because men suffered below it. Most visitors will never hear their names. They will see the towers. They will see the cables. They will see the skyline. They will see the beauty. But behind that beauty were men in mud, pressure, rope, stone, wire, and pain. The Brooklyn Bridge did not just connect to cities. It connected progress to sacrifice. It connected ambition to bodies. It connected a public triumph to private suffering. And that is the part of the story that deserves to be said out loud. They built one of the greatest structures in American history, and many of them disappeared into the official story that structure created. That was the Brooklyn Bridge. A bridge born from a dead engineer's dream, kept alive by a sick engineer's mind, carried forward by a woman history underestimated, and raised by workers who stood where the public never stood. Under the river, inside the pressure, on the towers, along the cables. The bridge became a postcard, a landmark, and a symbol of New York. But before it became beautiful, it was a workplace where men hurt, breathed, dug, lifted, and kept going because the city wanted a crossing, and their families needed the wage. Every photograph of the bridge shows what survived: stone, cable, water, skyline. But the harder thing to see is what the bridge consumed. The strength of men who worked below the river. The health of men who came up changed. The names of laborers who helped build a miracle and then vanished back into the streets. So when people walk across the Brooklyn Bridge today, they are not only crossing the East River, they are walking over a foundation of pressure, pain, and forgotten labor. The bridge still holds. The city still uses it. The skyline still frames it. But beneath every footstep is the part of the story that never became a postcard. If you want to hear more real stories behind the famous bridges, dams, tunnels, monuments, and cities built by workers whose names were forgotten, subscribe to this channel, not just for history, but for the people history left behind.